Imagine putting a player from the late 1990s into today's NBA. He is 6'6", can score from almost anywhere on the court, is deadly from the free throw line, can knock down contested jump shots, and becomes even more dangerous when the game gets tight. He isn't just standing in the corner waiting for someone to pass him the ball. He can come off screens, rise over defenders, shoot off the dribble, and create his own shot when the offense breaks down. Now imagine telling people that player might be worth $200 million today. The first reaction would probably be simple. Who? Because Allan Houston is one of those NBA players whose name has slowly disappeared from the biggest conversations. People remember the New York Knicks of the 1990s for Patrick Ewing. They remember the defensive battles, the rivalry with Miami, and the incredible 1999 playoff run. But when people talk about the best shooters and scorers of that era, Allan Houston is often missing from the conversation, and that's strange. Houston was a two-time All-Star who averaged 17.3 points per game over a 13-year NBA career. He was a career 40.2% three-point shooter and an excellent free throw shooter, and during his peak with the Knicks, he became one of the league's most reliable perimeter scorers. But the numbers alone don't explain why this story is interesting, because Allan Houston didn't play in the NBA we see today. He played when teams took fewer threes, when offenses were more physical and crowded, and when spacing was not the foundation of almost every successful offense. And despite playing in that environment, Houston became one of the most dangerous jump shooters in basketball. So here's the real question. If Allan Houston was already this effective in the 1990s and early 2000s, what would happen if you gave him today's spacing, today's shot selection, and today's obsession with perimeter shooting? Would a player like that really be worth $200 million? At first, it sounds ridiculous. But by the end of this story, you might start asking a different question. Would today's NBA be willing to pay even more? Before Allan Houston became one of the faces of New York basketball, he was already a scorer with one very clear skill. He could shoot the basketball almost anywhere. Houston entered the NBA in 1993 after being selected 11th overall. From the beginning, his game was built around scoring efficiency, shooting mechanics, and the ability to rise over defenders. He wasn't the fastest player in the league. He wasn't the most explosive. He wasn't the type of athlete who would dominate a highlight reel with impossible dunks. His weapon was something much more dangerous. He could make difficult shots look normal. That sounds simple, but difficult shot making is one of the most valuable skills in basketball. There are plenty of players who can knock down an open jumper, but what happens when the game slows down? What happens when the defense knows exactly where the ball is going? What happens when there are 10 seconds left on the shot clock, the offense has failed, and somebody has to create something? That's where players like Allan Houston become valuable. Houston began his career with the Detroit Pistons, where he showed flashes of becoming a serious scorer, but his career changed when he joined the New York Knicks. New York became the place where the next version of Allan Houston emerged. The Knicks were not playing pretty basketball. They were playing survival basketball. Every game felt physical. Every playoff series felt personal. Every basket was difficult. And in the middle of all of that was Allan Houston, a player whose job became incredibly simple. When New York needed points, give him the ball. That is when people began to understand how dangerous he could be. To understand Allan Houston's value, you have to understand the NBA he played in. This was not the modern league, where teams spread the floor with 4 shooters and create wide-open driving lanes. The NBA during Houston's prime could be brutal for perimeter scorers. Defenses were physical, the paint was crowded, and possessions often turned into half-court battles, and yet Houston kept scoring. During the 1999-2000 season, he averaged 19.7 points per game. In 2001 and 2002, he averaged 20.4. Then, during the 2002 and 2003 season, he reached the peak of his scoring career, averaging 22.5 points per game, while shooting nearly 40% from 3 and more than 91% from the free throw line. But here's what makes those numbers more interesting. Houston wasn't taking the same type of shots modern shooters take. Today's elite shooters often benefit from offenses designed specifically to generate three-point attempts. Teams create spacing to give them room, and analytics tell coaches exactly how valuable the three-point shot can be. Houston didn't have that world. A large part of his game was built around the mid-range jumper. But Houston wasn't just taking random long twos. He was an elite shot maker. He could curl around a screen, catch the ball, rise immediately, and release before the defender had time to recover. He could pull up in transition. He could shoot moving to his right or left. And when defenders crowded him, his height and smooth release allowed him to get shots off that smaller guards simply couldn't take. At 6'6", Houston had size for a shooting guard. You could pressure him, chase him around screens, and put a hand in his face. Sometimes it simply didn't matter. He could shoot over you. Shooting isn't just about standing behind a line. Shooting is movement, balance, footwork, release speed, and the ability to make shots under pressure. Allan Houston had all of those things. And if he was already shooting at an elite level from 3, while playing in an era that did not encourage the volume of threes we see today, what happens if he grows up in the modern NBA? Would his coaches tell him to take more threes? Almost certainly. Would teams run more actions specifically designed to get him open? Probably. Would a player with his shooting touch become even more dangerous with modern spacing? Now the $200 million argument starts becoming much more interesting. But Allan Houston wasn't valuable simply because he could shoot. He could shoot when the pressure was at its highest. And if there is one moment that defines his career, it happened in 1999. The New York Knicks were facing the Miami Heat in the first round of the playoffs. The Knicks were trying to survive a series against one of their biggest rivals, and Game 5 came down to the final seconds. New York was trailing. Houston received the ball and drove toward the basket. With less than a second remaining, he released a running shot. The ball bounced, then dropped. Knicks win, series over. It became one of the most famous shots in franchise history. And suddenly, Allan Houston was more than just a good shooter. He was the guy who made that shot. But that moment wasn't a lucky accident in the middle of an otherwise average career. It represented exactly what Houston had become. When the game was difficult, he wanted the basketball. There are players who can score 20 points when everything is going well. Then there are players who can get you a basket when nothing is working. The defense knows what you're trying to do. The crowd knows what you're trying to do. Your teammates know the ball is going to you. And somehow, you still find a way to score. That was Houston's real value. The jump shot was the weapon, but confidence was what made it dangerous. That confidence became essential during the Knicks' incredible 1999 playoff run. New York reached the NBA Finals, and Houston served as one of the team's most important offensive players. Think about the type of player every championship contender searches for today. You need stars, but eventually every great team needs someone who can create points when the offense gets ugly. Someone who can come off a screen, shoot over a closeout, and punish a defense for helping 1 second too long. Allan Houston could do that. And in today's NBA, that type of skill has become even more valuable. This is where we have to separate Allan Houston, the historical player, from Allan Houston as a modern NBA archetype. If you took the exact player from 2003 and dropped him into today's NBA without changing anything, would he instantly become Stephen Curry? Of course not. That isn't the argument. The argument is much more interesting. What would happen if Allan Houston developed inside the modern basketball environment? Today's young shooters take thousands of three-pointers before they ever reach the NBA. Coaches encourage them to shoot from deep. Offensive systems are designed to create open perimeter shots. Players spend entire summers improving movement shooting and shooting off the dribble. And Houston already possessed the foundation. He had an elite shooting stroke. He could shoot off screens. He could shoot off the dribble. And he could score from the mid-range when the defense took away the three. That last part may actually be more valuable than people realize. Modern defenses are designed to take away easy shots. They protect the rim and chase shooters off the three-point line. So what happens when a defense successfully takes away the obvious options? You need someone who can make a difficult shot. Houston made a career out of difficult shots. Imagine him running through a modern offense. One screen, then another. The defense switches. Houston catches the ball. The defender closes out. Instead of forcing a bad three, he takes one dribble into the mid-range and rises. That is a shot he made for years. Or imagine him next to a dominant playmaker. A superstar drives into the lane, the defense collapses, and the ball kicks out. Houston is waiting. Modern spacing would give him opportunities that simply didn't exist as frequently during his actual career. That is why today's NBA might look at Allan Houston differently, not simply as a shooter, but as a three-level perimeter scorer who could fit almost anywhere. Put him next to an elite point guard, and he spaces the floor. Put him next to a dominant big man, and he punishes defenses for collapsing. Need someone to score late in the game? He can create his own shot. Need a secondary option who doesn't need the ball all game? He can move without it. That kind of player is extremely valuable. And that brings us back to the number. $200 million. Let's be honest. A $200 million contract is not given to a player just because he has a good jump shot. There are thousands of great shooters. What makes a player valuable is what that shooting allows him to do. Houston's shooting opened up everything. Defenders couldn't leave him. They had to chase him. That created space. His size allowed him to shoot over smaller defenders. His ability to score from the mid-range meant chasing him off the three-point line didn't automatically solve the problem. And his confidence meant that late in games, he could still be a legitimate scoring option. That is the difference between a specialist and a weapon. A specialist does one thing. A weapon forces the entire defense to adjust. Allan Houston forced adjustments. In 2001, Houston signed what was at the time one of the largest contracts in NBA history, a 6-year deal worth roughly $100 million. Even in the NBA of that era, teams already understood his value. New York knew exactly what it had: a reliable scorer, a two-time All-Star, one of the best shooters in basketball, and a player who had already proven himself under playoff pressure. The modern NBA has changed dramatically since then. The salary cap has grown, player salaries have exploded, and shooting has become more valuable than ever. So when we say Allan Houston could be worth $200 million today, we aren't claiming that he was secretly a 30-point-per-game superstar. We're asking a different question. What would a team pay today for a 6'6" perimeter scorer who could shoot at an elite level, create his own shot, punish defenses from the mid-range, and perform under playoff pressure? The answer is probably a lot, and depending on his age, development, and the salary cap environment, $200 million is not difficult to imagine. So would the NBA really pay Allan Houston $200 million today? Maybe the exact number would depend on the market. Maybe some teams would see him as a star. Maybe others would see him as the perfect second option next to a franchise player. But here's what I believe. The NBA today would understand Allan Houston's value better than the NBA he actually played in. He was a shooter before shooting became the center of basketball. He was a movement scorer before modern offenses were designed around movement shooting. He could make contested jumpers before teams began building entire systems to create easier ones. And when the pressure was highest, he had already proven that he wanted the basketball. That's why the $200 million question isn't really about the number. It's about recognizing what type of player Allan Houston actually was. He wasn't just a guy who could stand in the corner and hit open threes. He was a scorer. He was a shot maker. He was a playoff performer. And at his best, he was one of the most dangerous perimeter weapons in basketball. Maybe he didn't play in the perfect era for his game. Maybe the NBA was still years away from understanding just how valuable shooting could become. But if prime Allan Houston entered today's league, with today's spacing, today's three-point volume, and today's contracts, $200 million might not sound expensive at all. It might sound like the price of one of the most valuable skills in modern basketball. So now the question is yours. Would you pay Allan Houston $200 million today?